You're listening to the podcast for all of the news, notes, and breakdowns for your Ohio State Buckeyes. This is Sons of the Shoe with Nick Wilson and Spencer German.
Sons of the Shoe is back. Spencer German, Jake Vulinec with you as we bring you another edition of the episode, a pre-national championship edition of the show. Our first of a couple different episodes are going to drop here. Hoping to have a conversation with someone who covers the Notre Dame Fighting Irish to sort of talk about the game a little bit more from that perspective. And Jake and I have a couple other sort of thoughts and things to share leading up to Monday. It feels like, Jake, this game is like so far away still. The gap between the second round, the quarterfinal round, and the semifinal round felt kind of long. But this feels like it's even longer. I mean, maybe because like you had Christmas in the middle and you had New Year's in the middle with the last games, and now this time it's just like we're just kind of sitting here waiting, twiddling our thumbs. But yeah, we have a ways to go yet. It feels like till we get to Monday in the championship game.
Yeah, still a few days to go. Excited, think that we get to a good spot. I heard Chip Kelly and Jim Knowles speaking, and everybody wanted to talk about Texas instead of the national championships. We're right where we need to be. Everyone asking questions about Texas. I was sitting around. I was looking around going, are we forgetting what game's coming up? Is that like, I know that we have multiple press conferences to talk to everybody here, but are we forgetting what day is coming up?
So it's funny you say that because, and we'll talk about this in a later episode. That is probably the thing I'm the most nervous about is it seems like everybody's just like looking past Notre Dame. Everyone's just like already ordering their shirts that say Ohio State national champions. And I don't know how I feel about that. Like, yeah, I think Ohio State's the better team too. But the fact that everybody's picking them, the fact that everyone's like just, preordaining, they're going to have their parade. I don't know. I'm trying to come to grips with that, and I can't really handle it right now, and it's making me nervous, more nervous than I thought I would be. So, but I do want to remind you guys to please like, follow, subscribe, review the Sons of the Shoe podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, the Odyssey app, and many other places, including the 92 Through the Fan YouTube channel, where you can watch this show if you so choose. Not this episode live, but you can watch other episodes live or post-game reaction episodes live. And just getting involved in the conversation with us via the comment section. We do appreciate you guys checking on in with us for this episode as we get you ready for Notre Dame and Ohio State coming on the pike here, as we said on Monday. And I actually think, like, more broadly, Jake, I want to treat this episode or I want to use this episode to sort of talk about some things that are sort of like ancillary to the game and not so much like the X's and O's of how this thing's going to play out and how we feel about Notre Dame and the matchup wise. And I think a good place to start is actually a clip that comes from our station where we work at 92 Through the Fan, and Doug Lamarice, tremendous and well-known Ohio State reporter for Cleveland.com. He's obviously done a phenomenal job over the course of his career of covering the Buckeyes. And he's been just, again, a great source of information when it comes to this team over the years and this program over the years. And he was on multiple times with Ken and Lima last week. And then this week he was on with Baskin and Phelps. And he's really banging the drum on this idea of the Buckeyes potentially building a modern day dynasty. I want you to hear his thoughts. And then obviously Jake and I will react on the other side.
I think Ohio State is probably best positioned if there is a new modern dynasty that fills the Alabama gap, fills the brief Georgia gap. I think it's Ohio State. Now, a lot of people would argue with NIL, with the portal, the whole point is you're not going to do that anymore. But they have quarterback lined up for like the next 5 years with Julian Sayin and Ohio kid Tavian St. Clair. Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs are back next year, right? They have a lot of guys in the pipeline. The recruiting is good. The NIL is good. The NIL, like 18 months ago, wasn't. And that was the kind of thing, like you look at the future, can they compete? They absolutely can compete in recruiting and NIL. And the whole thing for Ohio State in the 14 playoff was getting in. They finished 5th and 6th and 7th constantly. They're always going to be in the playoff. So, people have espoused like all the pressure, the Michigan losses. Maybe he goes out on top and says like, that's it. But I think they could win 3 of the next 5. So can you turn that down, especially with these young QBs they have lined up? So my guess is he stays and really makes a run at potentially, which is crazy to say, the greatest era in Ohio State history. That's the ceiling. That's out there. Can you really turn your back on that?
So I think that was a really well thought out sort of look ahead for the Buckeyes if they're able to pull off the win on Monday. We always want to use the caveat of like they obviously got to finish the job here in the national championship game against Notre Dame. But Jake, I think this is interesting because I kind of have always believed since this era sort of since Nick Saban retired last year, my thought was that we're never going to really see these dynastic styled college football teams again because there's just so many moving parts nowadays. NIL is allowed for that. The transfer portal is allowed for that. But I think the way he lays it out, like there is an opportunity here for Ohio State to maybe become the team that seizes Nick Saban stepping away and be like, listen, we're the new dynasty. We're the new team that in this new era has everything figured out. We have all the resources and we are, taking our team to on championship runs every single year. Do you think and see what Doug's laying out, or do you think that's a little far-fetched to think that far ahead at this point?
No, I see it. I see where he's going with it. I just think a lot of what Doug had to say was predicated on the fact that the offense for the next several years is going to be elite, right? Julian saying Jeremiah Smith's going to be there. They have more wide receiver talent in the room right now that I'm sure will develop to be NFL talent because why wouldn't it? But my big thing for Ohio State is if you're going to be a dynasty, you have to do it on both sides of the ball. We've seen how impactful the defense has been this year, and that's sort of the spot where I'm like, yes, you're doing fine in recruiting. I'm not acting like there's a bunch of 2-stars coming up behind the guys that are there right now. But you always have the concern of there's 9 guys who aren't returning after this year, 8 guys out of the starting 11.
Yeah, it's about that many. I mean, you walk sort of through the defensive line guys, JT, Jack, Tyleik Williams. Those guys are all gone. We know Burke is gone. We know Igbinosun, maybe for the best, is gone. There's a couple linebackers on that list too. So yeah, like it's a pretty hefty list of guys that are going to be leaving. And I do like what you're saying, Jake. I think is maybe the key point in this. Like he's saying he thinks they could win 3 of the next 5, and I think that's probably true. But you're also, I think, accounting for the fact that I don't know that Ohio State's going to take like a Michigan step back where they're like 7-5. And I say that understanding they beat Ohio State this year. Okay, fine. You guys get the feather in your cap on that one, you Michigan fans out there. But I do think like next year, the expectations of you're gonna, beat everybody up in the Big Ten and you're gonna go win a national championship, like there'll still be those aspirations, like, okay, let's go repeat. But nobody's gonna be like surprised if you fall a little bit short of that next year because this was the year that you were sort of building to. Ohio State tends to reload, not rebuild those. So it's not going to be like a rebuild year. Like they'll still be in the playoff, I would imagine. But yeah, like that's probably the biggest thing that I think about is like, okay, well, knowing what you're saying, that's also kind of come with the caveat of they probably take at least a little bit of a step back next year and aren't title contenders. So that means you then got to win 2 of the next 3 after that. And yeah, maybe they can get there, but so much can change in the NIL era.
Yeah, like it's even the recruits that you have in the building right now, it's an interesting dynamic because we could sit here and say, well, you have Jeremiah Smith for the next 2 years. You might have Jeremiah Smith for the next 2 years.
I mean, I would assume it's a lock. He's back next year. Yes. But if they win the Natty, like he's not going to leave, and I'm sure if they had to pay him a little more, they'll pay him a little bit more. But yeah, like you're right. Like after that, who knows?
Yeah, like it's again, I think Jeremiah Smith is more so in it for the long haul for pointing to a guy, but in general, those types of players could just sort of be like, oh, you can tell me I'm going to play for another team who's probably going to make the college football playoff and make an extra $5 million. Why wouldn't I sign up for that? Like those guys could be gone as fast as they're here. So, like, yes, I love the idea of this could be a dynasty. I think what you see this year is, especially the way that Ryan Day is coached, completely changes the aspect of that. I don't know that any of us thought that before the last few games that we got to watch, right? Just the college football playoffs.
Right.
But you have to keep in mind, you have to retain guys. You have to make sure that next class coming up is on par with who's here right now. Or, things can be different. You can have different strengths, but you have to put together a team that is national championship worthy, which is not going to be easy. Like, look at Jack Sawyer. It took Jack Sawyer every year that he was here to finally bloom into what we were hoping that he could be. And that was a guy that everybody had high expectations for. And it took until, again, senior year to get there.
There's a lot of different factors here. One of them that you alluded to there, which is like just the development of guys. Like what you said, like Jack Sawyer was kind of projected as the next Bosa brother, and that didn't really come to fruition until this year. He's really started to like be a better player, wreak havoc, and he's certainly increasing his draft stock, getting ready for the draft with this playoff run. But yeah, like it took some time to get there. Some people are the Bosa brothers immediately. Some people it takes more time, and so you can never really project all those things. And the other thing that throws a wrench into all this, Jake, is just like the NIL stuff is a part of it. Like Tavian St. Clair, yeah, he's here right now. Next year, I mean, we just saw Aaron Nolan up in enter the transfer portal and go to South Carolina. Like things can change when teams come calling and they're like, "Hey, we want to give you some money." Now, Tavian is an Ohio guy, so maybe he was always dreamed. I don't know like his full story, but if he's always kind of felt he wanted to play for Ohio State, wanted to stay local, all that, like maybe that stuff factors into him staying on top of the money that he would be getting. But so that's a huge factor. Obviously, it's just like year to year how much can be different. And then on top of that, like the other thing you got to think about is other coaching hires that pop up. Like Chip Kelly has said that he enjoys this role more than the head coaching role now in college because of all the political BS that you got to deal with and the schmoozing and the NIL. And it's just not really what he enjoyed anymore. But the like maybe this run springboards him into another job, or maybe this springboard him getting back to the NFL. Like who knows? Maybe not as a head coach, but like as an OC or something like that. Like that. So that could change things because then it's Ryan Day being the play caller again. And I do think like Ryan Day is still a good play caller, but we obviously have seen the shortcomings over the years, and I think Chip has helped alleviate some of those. So I don't know that you like freak out if he's gone, but I also think like we've seen Ryan Day's ability to pass the designate some things this year, I think is part of the reason why the team is as successful as it's been to this point. So I think that's huge. And he could always find a new OC to bring in too. So that's fine. But yeah, like that sort of changes the dynamics a little bit. And then also we talk so much about Brian Hartline year to year. Like the second Brian Hartline decides, you know what, I'm going to go take an OC job with this big school, or I'm going to go get a head coaching job. Like someone's going to pluck him at some point to be a head coach. And then you lose that recruiting pipeline that he's been for you with all those receivers. So yeah, like there's just so I like where Doug's head is at. I like the idea that this Ohio State team, and I can subscribe to the idea that this Ohio State team is always going to be in the mix for a national championship. It's just who they are. But it's hard for me to like see that deep into the forest through the trees and project that because of the era that we live in, and things year to year are just so fluid. Like I get it. Maybe this is the team that could do it. Maybe this is the team that could pull off like keeping things sort of stable year to year and avoiding like the big overhauls in the transfer portal and all that. But I need to see it before I believe it, because right now so much changes on a weekly basis, on a yearly basis, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I don't think that if Chip Kelly was gone, Ryan Day's taking over play calling, because I don't think that's a potential anymore in college football. I don't think you can focus on recruiting and everything else.
Yeah, he's embraced that CEO role this year for sure.
Yeah, but I don't know. It's like maybe the team can do it. I just feel it's so early, before we even win one national championship, to be talking about winning 3 of the next 5. Like, let's hit mile marker 1 here before we're 5 years in the future thinking about 3 trophies being lifted into the air. It's just so hard to think that far ahead in today's game and predict that this team is going to be great for 5 years. Again, I'm with him. I think college football playoffs is pretty much a shoe-in. Your recruiting is always going to be good enough to get you there. The team is always going to be capable of winning, 8-9 games and getting you into the college football playoffs at the very least. I think it's just getting to that dynasty level of this team's dominant. And like right now, Ohio State's like 10-point favorites to win the national championship.
Yeah.
Like, are we really going to see a team this dominant 3 of the next 5 years? Because you might have a team this good. There also just might be an Oregon team this good, a Texas team.
Well,
put them on the board.
And we've talked about how unique this team is, Jake, because it is kind of like a blending of 2 eras. It's the old era where you got all these guys who came back, and you paid to sort of retain some of those guys and keep them for an extra year. But yeah, like it on top of, you added a few key transfers in Caleb Downs and Will Howard and Quinshon Judkins, like obviously Seth McLaughlin before he got hurt. Like, so it's kind of this blending of eras. And I think that's where like the premise is from Doug, where he's like, I just watched this team sort of do both or like use all the different avenues to build this team, retaining your own guys, getting transfer portal guys, bringing in new recruits that are going to play at a high level for you. And I do think there's reason to think that Ohio State could be the team to be the next great dynasty in this new era. They have the resources and the ability to do it. But again, I don't want to get ahead of myself. And that's honestly why I'm so nervous about this game, because yeah, it's nice for Doug to sit there and say that on a radio hit on 92 through the Fan and make us all feel good and be like, oh, start looking into the future about like what this could be and how excited we're going to be about Ohio State football for the next 5 years. But at the same time, they still got to get the job done on Monday. And that's why I'm like, yeah, that could happen. But it's also likely that they could just get here now and then not get back for seven more years, just based on how competitive the sports is right now. And so for that reason, I'm like, that's why they have to get the job done this time and at least get one, so that then we can start thinking about those things even more. Not to say I'm not enjoying this conversation. We didn't want to bring it to the podcast, but no. I just think like I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, because like they still got to at least win this one first.
Yeah, I mean, it's been 2 national championships in the last like close to 60 years for Ohio State, right? Like we have to be pushing, I think, that number right now. So it's like, yeah, you seize your opportunity when you're here. Ohio State's been great pretty much every season since then, right? They've been really good over the last 60 years. It's just winning a national championship is very difficult. And being in the college football playoffs helps you get there. Like you'll always have an opportunity as long as you're a top 12 team, but still not an easy task. It's not like it's just a shoe-in to get you there.
I mean, it took 10 years to get – well, they got back to the national championship obviously several years ago and they lost to Bama. But it took 10 years to be in a spot where like they're sort of favored and people feel really good about. Like if they pull this off on Monday, it'll be the first championship they've won in 10 years. But yeah, like it took you a decade to get back to that level, that stage, and get that accomplishment sort of checked off. So I can't just like shoe in and assume in an era that so much changes day to day that they're going to win 3 of the next 5, even though I love that idea and it makes me excited because I want to see Ohio State do that. So I like where Doug's head is at with that. But yeah, it's not easy to get here. And if it was, Ohio State would have won multiple championships right by now. There's a reason why Nick Saban is praised the way he is, because that Alabama dynasty, like, yeah, there was always teams that were in the mix. But Alabama winning as much as they did, it was like, man, this guy's the greatest. Like he gets this, he produces this result almost every time he's out there. He has a chance, his team has a chance to win it all. And so that's what's so impressive about it. Like for Ryan Day to take this program to that level, there's a lot more they still got to sort of prove and do. I will say this as we sort of look ahead a little bit to this game. What I think is interesting about Notre Dame, Ohio State, Jake, is that I did do a segment earlier this season about the coaches I thought were on the hottest seats coming into this year. And I'm pretty sure that I said Ryan Day had the hottest seat of anybody coming into the season. I threw some other names out there. I thought Kalen DeBoer's seat was kind of hot just because year one taking over for Nick Saban is not something that anybody really envies you for. I didn't think he'd get fired year one, but like certainly the expectations are there. And we've heard some criticisms of him as the season kind of came to an end and some of the guys are losing and whatever. But beyond that, like I think I said like Lane Kiffin too, just because Ole Miss now in an SEC without Nick Saban has a chance to kind of prove itself. And they missed the playoff. But to me, Ryan Day and I thought Marcus Freeman were the two coaches with the hottest seats because, again, Marcus Freeman kind of inherited the job and fell short last year of like what people expected. So I just kind of felt like there was a lot of pressure on him to deliver, and it looked like his seat was really turning up after that loss to NIU. But what he has done has been remarkable, and obviously what Ryan Day has done since the Michigan game to get his team sort of refocused on the task at hand and that sort of humbling that they experienced has also been remarkable. I think it's just kind of ironic that this is where we ended up with these two coaches being the ones whose teams end up at the mountaintop competing for a championship.
Yeah, it's a little interesting just because I think you look at 2 historic programs that you expect to do well every year, and their coaches were there, like, and an opportunity to put them in a position to do well, right? Like, you had good players, but that's sort of why your seat was hot, is because, hey, your program's been fine. Like, you've gotten the recruits, we've had high expectations for the teams, and you've just fallen short. And then both of these teams sort of, I would say, benefiting off of the expanded playoffs, right? And their opportunity to get in and actually jump at the opportunity to make a run to the national championship. And that's the interesting thing I think about the new playoffs, though, is that in a year like this, a loss to Michigan would have sent fans spiraling because you wouldn't have made the college football playoffs. You would have been out. That would have been the end of your year.
Right.
Notre Dame, the loss to NIU probably would have ended your year. And now both these teams get to prove that, hey, just because you have a bad loss or a bad couple losses doesn't mean that your team is incapable. That's just the world of football that we live in. So I think that's interesting. I also love the fact that Marcus Freeman, just sort of in spite of Brian Kelly, is now in a national championship, because I always think that's a good time. Brian Kelly left for LSU because, well, my resources at Notre Dame are limited, and I'll be much better off at LSU with I'll have better recruits, we'll have better funding for the program. And then Brian Kelly leaves, and it's like Marcus Freeman takes a couple of years. Then he's like, oh, we can make a national championship work with what's here. Like,
as you were talking about Brian Kelly, I had to pull this up because I saw this earlier. There was a quote from Brian Kelly about Notre Dame being in the championship, and this just made me laugh. He said, quote, "A lot of guys there are on both sides of the ball. I recruited. Obviously, I want to see those guys win it all, and I think they're in great position. Totally excited for those guys. I wasn't leaving Notre Dame because I couldn't win a national championship. You can win championships at Notre Dame, but I chose another path because I wanted a different challenge." That's what he apparently said about the matchup with Ohio State Notre Dame.
Yeah, no, last I checked, he specifically said he was leaving because maybe he didn't use the exact phrasing that you can't win a championship at Notre Dame, but he was upset with the resources he had with the team. Am I incorrect in saying that? Do we not remember that?
That checks out. I mean, yeah, we're paraphrasing a little bit, but it was basically him insinuating that he didn't have the resources he needed there. And I don't. Honestly, can I just say, like, the best part about Notre Dame making it to this stage is all the trolling going on about Brian Kelly. Like, it is hilarious to hear everybody just continuing to pile on this guy, because there's nobody maybe more universally hated as a coach in college football than Brian Kelly. And it started with the way he left Notre Dame, but then I think what really put it over the top was like the fake accent thing when he got to LSU. That was the thing. Like, nothing screamed you're fake as hell than you showing up to a different place, like a different region of the country, and trying to talk like the people from that region of the country. Just absolutely preposterous. And that guy sucks. Like, he just flat out sucks.
Like, you just missed the entire ball there. Like, when you're like, oh, you can be embraced by the SEC. They don't want you to come in and be an SEC guy. They just want you to, like, get a good football team going, right? just come in and be a human being.
Yes.
And he walks in and
person. Like, what are you doing?
I mean, look, man, we're gonna come in here and we're gonna.
I'm here with my family. Guy's the worst.
Come on, man.
That's such the worst. I honestly, I think this needs to be turned up a notch. I think no matter who wins the game on Monday, they just need to open up their on the field press conference by saying, "I'd like to know where Brian Kelly is right now." It'd be better if it's Marcus Freeman, but obviously I don't want that result. So I hope it's Ryan Day and he just takes it to another level and he asks where Brian Kelly is right now. I think that would be hilarious for both fan bases, and both fan bases would enjoy it. I honestly, and we can talk about this more leading up to the game, I want to know if Ryan Day is at all going to have like the self-awareness to like lean it. If he wins it and in like a very like euphoric moment, if he cracks some sort of joke on behalf of like himself for that comment last year, I think that would be awesome if he pulls something like that off. But obviously they got to win it first. And we'll see.
He did have a comment earlier this week about the fact that he hasn't spoken to Lou Holtz since the whole debacle.
I do remember seeing that. Yes. So. I can't imagine why. Well, I can't imagine why. There's probably multiple reasons. Because of what you said, but also Lou Holtz is kind of just old and senile now. And I don't think anybody's heard from Lou Holtz since that game. Like, that was the last time I think Lou Holtz was like even on anybody's radar whatsoever. Like, is he even still alive? We need a pulse check on Lou Holtz.
I don't know that Notre Dame has his contact information. I don't know that.
Yeah,
I mean, if he walks away from his fax machine, it's hard to find him, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, I don't know that anybody's heard from Lou Holtz, but so that's not surprising. But we'll see if there's any sort of fun reaction. That brings us to the final sort of section of the show here, and we're gonna do our 4 Down territory here because we do have a guest lined up for this week as part of a second episode we're gonna drop leading up to the game. We also are planning some other fun stuff. We're going to do sort of like a prediction, shorter, quick episode on Monday leading up to the game, which we'll talk more about how we feel about the game in that one as well. I do think as part of our guest show, Jake, I want to have the conversation with you about how much stock we should put in Michigan fans who are trying to discredit this run right now because they didn't beat Michigan. I think that is a massive conversation among the college football world, among Ohio State, Michigan fans right now, and it deserves some attention. So we'll get to that later in the week. But we start off, Jake. I will turn it over to you as always for 4-down territory.
It's first down.
So this topic may be old by the time you're listening to this show potentially, and I'm actually trying to check right now to make sure I don't have a notification telling me that this actually happened. But Quinn Ewers has yet to officially declare for the draft. He has until Wednesday, sometime in the afternoon, to do so when this episode is dropping. So, Jake, there's reportedly offers on the table from a number of schools. I think Bama's been involved, and Ohio State's name has been mentioned. I know Notre Dame at one point was mentioned as well. I'm curious your thoughts. Should Quinn Ewers go pro, which is what he said in that interview we did as part of the pregame leading up to the Cotton Bowl, said he was going to do, or should he consider another year in college?
I mean, if we're talking about his financial future, probably consider another year in college.
Yeah.
But I also don't know that the Quinn Ewers we saw this year, unless you are fully convinced that can be eliminated and he's going to take the next step up and be elite next year, you got to kind of run with what you got, right? It's a pretty weak quarterback class. You're probably considered to be, I don't know, right now, a third-round pick, probably somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
I would imagine, a third, fourth. Still not a bad spot to be. You're going to get a pretty handsome payday off of it. Maybe not what you have in college, but you also have a chance to prove yourself at the NFL level. And who knows? If you go out and have a terrible year next year, you could be talking about not getting drafted. That's how fast it can change. You'd really be banking on yourself. And I don't know that if I'm Quinn Ewers after playing this year with what is one of the most star-studded teams who's in the college football playoff semifinal, that I'd be banking on next year being better for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. A team like Bama, I feel like getting somebody like Quinn Ewers kind of makes some sense. I don't know what their future looks like at quarterback. I think they have that Washington transfer, Austin Mack. I think there's another one, Keelan Russell, I think his name is, and he's like a true freshman. So I'm sure they have some guys waiting in the wings, but they're kind of in a spot where it's maybe we need to sort of bridge the gap here with a guy that we trust. And maybe Notre Dame sort of falls in the same line, and they've kind of made a habit out of renting these quarterbacks year to year to sort of get them to that point or that level. Ohio State's interesting though, because it does feel like to me, Julian saying it sort of makes sense to sort of pass the torch to him for them. I mean, he's been in the program for a year now. He sat for the year. At that point, you kind of get to a place where guys just are going to keep transferring because they're not getting the opportunities. So I don't know. I'm sure he has options. I think financially, you're right. It probably makes sense for him to come back and make some money because he can probably make more in college than he will on a rookie contract in the NFL, just based on where he'll get drafted, I would assume. But yeah, I'm intrigued by it. The thing that I think I'm the most intrigued by is if Ohio State actually did this. Imagine an Ohio State-Texas rematch week 1 of next season with Quinn Ewers quarterbacking the other team now. That would be a great storyline to talk about throughout the offseason.
Yeah, going up against Arch Manning. It'd be something else to say the least. I don't know, but when you're Ohio State, like we talked about, you're probably in sort of a retool year next year, right? Where you're in a reload where you have some younger guys playing. Isn't that the perfect time to get Julian saying in and be all right, take your shots at it. If you struggle, you struggle. We'll let that come to fruition and let you have a year to develop while also starting, knowing that next year might not be the year.
Yeah. I think that's probably a good point too. Just where they're kind of at as a program certainly leans into that a little bit more as well. And kind of a nice place it feels like to pivot, especially if you win a national championship. Because then, if they were to lose, again, Ryan Day's not getting fired, but the pressure is still there because you haven't gotten over that hump. If you get over that hump, you'll get more leeway with this fan base. You'll get more time to sort of develop guys, and it won't be you got to win one right now. So yeah, I think that sort of feels right for the Buckeyes. And that'll bring up the next one here, Jake.
It's second down.
So Notre Dame is an independent school, as we know, and as you win each round of the college football playoff, there's a certain amount of money that these schools are all earning throughout the each level that they get to. I believe the total at this point is they've eclipsed $20 million as a program for winning in the semifinal or the quarterfinal and now the semifinal. And the way that this works for Ohio State is that money is sort of shared between or around the conference. You get your conference money, but because Notre Dame is independent, they get to pocket all that money themselves. Jake, is this a fair, as you talk about changing the college football playoff, is this a fair sort of outcome of this current system that Notre Dame gets to pocket all this money and a team like Ohio State has to share it with, 14 other teams in the conference?
No. In what world is this fair? Like, Ohio State's like,
So
we're scheduling your teams.
So the question, the follow-up to that is, so should Notre Dame be forced to join a conference?
Yes, they should always be forced to join a conference. The independent is the dumbest thing on the planet. Why are you allowed to be an independent in football? Like, they're the only school with their own contract rights for TV broadcasts. It is the dumbest thing. Okay, so they get to go out there and schedule whatever games that they want every year, right? Like, you get to hand pick your schedule, where Ohio State pick your school, whatever school you want, in whatever conference they're in. You're forced to schedule certain games. Like, Ohio State had to play Oregon this year. There was no way around it. A team that, well, if you want to keep your record looking a little bit more pretty, you probably don't face Oregon, right?
We'll worry the best teams Notre Dame faced was like Army and Navy at the time.
Yeah.
And that's about it.
Like, it was a light schedule. You lost to NIU. You literally lost to Northern Illinois. Shout out Mountain West, new edition, Northern Illinois.
Right, they did join the Mountain
yeah,
West.
Makes a whole lot of sense.
Trying to tear the MAC apart, man. What a sad day in college football.
Like, we just can't be taking teams out of the MAC. That's it. But no, it's so bad and so dumb. And now, so they get to benefit off of handpicking their schedule too. Like, oh, we actually get direct money for our TV deal that we don't have to share with anybody else in the way that other conferences do. We also get to pocket the bowl money. Oh, and we get to handpick our schedule.
Yeah.
And because our name's Notre Dame.
So I like on one hand, I will say the schedule was one thing, but they definitely have earned their path to get here. I mean, you beat Georgia, you beat a good Penn State team, so they've earned the amount that they've gotten based off their schedule was their schedule. But I think people underrated them because of their schedule and who they lost to this year. But what I will say is, I think the best way to do this is prorate it. Again, because Notre Dame's just never they're going to dig their feet in and try to not join a conference as long as they can, and so it almost has to be this thing where it's like, well, okay, if you were in a conference, you would get at least this much money. So you don't get the full 15 million or whatever it was for the semifinal round. You're just going to get 8 million. You get half of that or something like that. And you so I think that's the way that they are going to have to sort of do it, assuming that Notre Dame's going to stay independent. But yeah, it seems silly that some team gets to benefit in that way, just resource wise, especially as they talk more about rev sharing in college football in general. And that's now a thing. And the conferences are kind of sharing money across the board. All that stuff is coming into play more. And so if that's the case, Notre Dame shouldn't just be able to get gobs and gobs of money more than these other teams. I think it's a little ridiculous.
Spencer, we talked about how much money this Ohio State roster costs to put together this year.
Yeah.
Notre Dame could put together the exact same roster next year. They have $20 million.
Yeah, are people going to be mad at that? Are people going to bring that up? Oh man, they bought this roster with all that money that they won for free. Those freeloaders trying to win all this money in the college football playoff. Are people going to bring that up next year if they build this amazing roster and they're back in the stage next year? Come on.
Oh, and then by the way, we're talking about just a recurring cycle of Notre Dame taking millions and millions of dollars for themselves and then being able to use that and put that back towards their roster year after year if they translate this.
Which, by the way, speaking of taking digs at Brian Kelly, man, there's $20 million worth of resources that you were missing when you were at Notre Dame. So maybe if you just stayed a little longer, you would have got the money you needed. That brings us next, Jake, to...
Well, Spencer, they were his guys. It's third down.
I got a clip here to play. This is Joel Klatt, who we love on this show, from his own show, the Joel Klatt Show. And as we talk about uneven schedules and conference realignment and all that, we just did with Notre Dame, I think Joel actually presents a pretty solid argument or case for how things should be structured in college football.
We need more games of Power 4 against Power 4. Preferably, everybody is going to play a similar number or the same number of conference games. And as commissioner, that's what I would mandate. every conference is going to play the same number of conference games. And then I also believe that we need to take away scheduling from athletic directors. Like, we don't let NFL owners build their own schedule. So why in the world do we let athletic directors build their own schedule? I think that needs to be a centralized process. And if we do that, we can increase the valuable inventory 5, 6, 7, 10-fold. I'm looking at you, fans, and I'm like, I'm about to give you more of what you want. How do we do this? We've got to have an aligned schedule format. That's where we've got to start. And as commissioner, my suggestion for an aligned scheduling format, which every team would take part in, is a 9-1-2 model. Follow me here. 9-1-2. Every team in the country, 9 conference games. Every team in the country, 1 non-conference game against another Power 4 opponent. And every team in the country, 2 games against the group of 5 to help with their budget. So that's how I'm getting to 12. Everybody would play the exact same format.
So I think that's actually a brilliant setup. It makes a lot of sense. You can still help the smaller schools that obviously aren't quite as competitive in college football, like the Akrons and the MAC schools of the world, by helping them sort of build their budget through their matchups with you. But you also get that, one notable non-conference game against a Power 4 opponent that, like, as we sit here and talk about Notre Dame and their schedule and all that, like, that sort of boosts your schedule. And it centralizes everything where we don't get to the end of the season, right? And you have all these debates about, well, this team's conference or this team's schedule is tougher than this team's. And there's still some of that because, like, the SEC is always going to get a boost because it's the SEC. The Big Ten will get a boost for a certain year. Like, so yeah, there's going to be some of that. But I think it's sort of, it at least, brings it down to a level where everyone is sort of more even at a starting point rather than like, well, this team's schedule is completely terrible and this team's schedule. So even if Notre Dame was included in that and they'd have to kind of play that same sort of style, that same sort of setup, I think it helps everybody when we get to sort of splitting hairs on these debates about who should get in.
Yeah, I can't wait for Notre Dame to join Conference USA for this. This will be incredible. This will be good. Non-conference games. Bring us Charlotte. Yeah, watch out for those 49ers, man. Woo! That's a tough conference. No, it's just going to be. But I do like the format overall. I think 9 conference games make a lot of sense for schools like the SEC, the Big Ten, your Power 4s of the world, the Pac-12, whatever the iteration we're getting of that. I don't even remember if it's 12 teams.
I keep saying it's the Power 5, but it's really just the Power 4 now. Yeah.
Well, the Pac-12 is coming back to a little bit of stardom, right?
But is it a power? Is it enough that it's a Power 5 now with like who they at? Boise State and.
I mean, the Mountain West got a bye this year.
Yeah, that's true.
And they basically took half the Mountain West. So,
but that was more so because of the setup of the playoff. But yeah, I see.
I agree. No, I'm just saying. I'm just like they had a couple of good teams.
Show some damn respect, Spencer, for the Mountain West. Come on. NIU just beat Notre Dame. They're going to that conference.
Yeah, the Mountain West deserves the respect. Okay. No, I do think it's a good format. I like the idea that, again, you have to keep sort of the group of 5 schools in because, like Joel laid out, like, you have to help fund their programs too. They obviously benefit large amounts of money out of going to the Ohio States, going to the Alabamas of the world. And you pay them a ton of money because you're like, hey, free schedule in. Alabama will do that in week 16, week like 12. But Ohio State tends to do it like week 2 or 3, like everybody else.
Yeah.
But it's a good format. Again, I think you get better football because you get the non-conference game against the Power 4, Power 5, however you want to say it. And that'll be a better matchup. I just don't know how you like. Are we still going to have the Ohio States being like, all right, coming up against another Power 4 school, give me Vanderbilt. Yeah, we'll take Vanderbilt. Like, it's a Power 4 school.
I think the point. I mean, look, here's the thing. Like, Ohio State has some tougher games coming up. Like, they're playing Alabama at a home and home in like 26, 27 or whatever it is, 27, 28. I don't even know. They got Texas the next couple of years. So, like, I think it would be something like that where you get like a premier game against a notable school. And that's what you're kind of trying to do there. And then like, yeah, you have your quote unquote cupcake games that are kind of like your chance to like get your team right, shake off the rust a little bit when the season starts and get then get into the conference schedule. So I don't know. I think it's a great setup. I think it makes a lot of sense. It would be interesting to see how Notre Dame goes about scheduling their conference opponents or if that does force them to join a conference. But I love that idea from Joel Klatt, which is just another reason why I love Joel Klatt. By the way, before we go to our final topic, naturally, Pete Thamel just reported like 5 minutes ago that Quinn Ewers is entering the NFL draft. So that topic is now stale and done, but it's okay. We had fun talking about it anyway. Jake, I'll cue you for our last one.
Right, no better time to knock it out than before it happens, right? Good job by us. Good job to nobody else could hear it. Yeah,
nobody else. It's going to be very untimely to everybody else, but to us, it made a lot of sense.
Nailed it. Absolutely killed that. Now, Spencer, it's 4th down.
Another fun clip. This one from Jim Knowles talking about the goal line stand that Ohio State had against Texas. If you like using the term football guys, this feels very much like that.
Coach, the big topic from the last game was the goal line stand. Can you go through each of the 4 plays just really quickly? I know.
First play, we got into big people. Boom, stopped them.
The play JT made, just...
Dang, you know. That's it. Second play, we were still in big people, and which leaves you vulnerable to some crack tosses and things. And our guys practiced it, and they read it, and Caleb Downs pulled his trigger exceptionally, and everybody rallied. Third play, we were in a red zone coverage that we haven't used before, so I think we had a good thing there, and Jack actually got pressure on that play, and we had all the routes covered, and then I decided to stay in the same call in the next play, and it worked.
I mean, that is like the classic, like making the sound effects, the boom, like that was awesome, and just kind of like his. I always enjoy like a coach's take on like a play or something like that is similar to like how we felt. Like we all saw Caleb Downs make that one play on second down. It was like, oh, like that's why you get a guy like that. Like he is that type of player, and so for him to be like as like complimentary of the player that he is was cool. And then also I always appreciate like the little insights into like that was a coverage that we never run before, and it's very reminiscent. I don't know if you saw the piece that was on Cleveland.com, Jake, but they talked about how the screen they ran before the half. Ryan Day actually throughout the season has talked about like eliminating like their screen part of their practice that they do. It's like a short little segment of practice that they've been doing because they don't really ever run screens. But there was basically like Ryan Day after the game talked about how, they talked about like what they were going to run. And his exact words were like, just run the screen on that play. And so it was almost like a throwaway, like, well, we only, we still sort of practice this, but we don't ever really use it. Let's just try it. And the fact that it turned into a touchdown and like a game-changing play is remarkable. So I always kind of love those nuances into how things come to be, what play calls are made, like why a coach is rolling with certain things, and new things that they roll out in key situations like that.
Yeah. Spencer, dare I say it? Players over plays.
Oh, the good old Lance Riesling callback.
Got in there. Man, you can't go an episode without calling to it. But no, you get the ball to your best, not your best player, but one of your best players, and Travion Henderson, let him work. But I do like the way that Jim Knowles sort of laid it out. Like, okay, new red zone coverage, like we covered all the routes, then Jack got pressure, right? Like that was sort of a toss away of like, hey, Jack's a pretty good player. We covered everything. All right, we'll just go back to running it again. Same scenario as before. Worked out, didn't it? Like,
yeah,
he was like, sort of a gamble. We just stuck with what we were doing already, and they already got to look at it. But I relied on my team to go out there and do it again, and Jack Sawyer did it again. And obviously the routes were covered on that play too, because Quinn had to roll out and start trying to make and look for something to happen, and that allowed for Jack to make the play that he did. So I like that aspect of not everything is so calculated out. It's like, man, we saw what they were running. We've seen them run fourth down in the goal line, so we adjusted. It was just like, worked on third down. Let's go back to
it. Yeah, it was cool. I guess I enjoy sometimes those insights from like a coaching perspective. And yeah, the sound effects were obviously awesome. So, all right, that's going to do it for another episode of Sons of the Shoe. Appreciate you guys listening in. You can skip past first down, or hopefully you skipped past first down because it became irrelevant by the time this episode aired for you. But we do appreciate you stopping by. Be sure to like, follow, subscribe, review the Sons of the Shoe podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, the Odyssey app, at the 92 to the Fan YouTube channel. Did I mention Apple Podcasts? where you can also comment at the 92 Through the Fan YouTube channel and let us know your thoughts on anything that we discussed today. We'll be back with some more stuff leading up to the game this week. Hopefully a Notre Dame guest coming down the pike here, and then our little preview with some picks on Monday before it all goes down in Atlanta. Appreciate you guys. As always, take care. And as always, Jake, go Bucks.
Go Bucks.